In this video, we're going to be learning about one of the most critical organs for the functions of the digestive system, and indeed one of the organs critical to the human body's very survival. So when we left off in the previous video, we had finished discussing the functions of the stomach and how the stomach's acid and digestive enzyme pepsin are used to digest most, if not all, of the protein inside of the food that you eat, and how the stomach uses its muscles in order to compress and generally churn together all of the partially digested food into an acidic, partially digested mixture that we call chyme. And when this chyme is pushed through the pyloric sphincter, exiting the stomach, it enters the very ironically named small intestines. We say ironically named because despite the fact that these are called the small intestines, they're actually the largest organ of the digestive system, accounting for more than half of the total length. Now, the problem about the small intestines is that for the most part, the small intestines do not actually produce their own digestive enzymes, which means digesting the undigested nutrients found in chyme is kind of impossible to do without help, which brings us to the topic of this two-part series of videos today, where we look at, in this video, the digestive functions of this organ called the pancreas. Now, when the food contents, the chyme, the partially digested food, and leftover stomach acid from the stomach enter into the small intestines, this sends a signal to the pancreas to start releasing its liquid containing all of the digestive enzymes that are needed in order to complete the process of digestion in the small intestines. And this mixture is what we call pancreatic juice, whose primary function is to contain digestive enzymes to digest the nutrients that up until this point have not been fully broken down. And the pancreas is easily the most multifunctional part of the digestive system when it comes to producing enzymes, which is where we'll see that it actually produces digestive enzymes to target every single nutrient that is present within food. Previously, we saw that saliva was the previous location that contained amylase in order to digest not just starch, but also glycogen found in meats such as liver or muscle. And the amylase produced by the pancreas, not surprisingly, is what we call pancreatic amylase, to distinguish it from salivary amylase. And the responsibility of this is to break down any polysaccharides, any large complex carbohydrates that have survived up until this point. For the first time, we also see lipase, which, again, the word lipase is derived from the word lipids, referring mostly to molecules that poorly dissolve in water, including fats. So the function of pancreatic lipase is to digest the large fat storage molecules, which are what we call triglycerides, and break them down into individual fatty acids that can then be absorbed from the small intestine into the circulatory system of the body. Now, even though we spent two videos talking about how dangerous and how effective pepsin is, occasionally some proteins slip through the cracks as well and are not fully digested, which is why the pancreas actually produces two protease enzymes to digest any proteins that weren't fully digested by the stomach, and these go by the names trypsin and chymotrypsin. And again, the name chymotrypsin kind of spells out that it is meant to target any proteins in the chyme that had previously not been digested by the stomach, and that's an easy way to remember this name. Now, the final types of digestive enzymes are to digest any nucleic acids, which is why we call these two enzymes nuclease, because whenever you eat the cells of another living thing, you are also eating all of the DNA that that living thing contains, as well as the RNA as well, and which is why these names are actually rather hilariously named DNAs and RNase. And the reason why they are named this way is calling the enzyme that digests DNA-ase just sounds a little bit silly. Same with RNase. So these enzymes are simply known as DNase and RNase that exist to digest the DNA and RNA found in the cells of the living things that made up the food that you consumed. Now, the other important component of chyme to remember from the stomach, after all, is all of the hydrochloric acid that was used to denature proteins and help dissolve the partially digested food that made it into the stomach. The problem is that the small intestine does not contain the physical and chemical protections that it uses to prevent the acid from eating away at the walls of the stomach. In fact, the intestines are one of the most vulnerable locations in the body to acid damage, which is why another major component of pancreatic juice is a base that exists to neutralize the NaHCl that makes it from the stomach into the small intestine here, and this base is going to be NaHCO3, sodium hydrogen carbonate, which, again, from the chemical formula, doesn't actually look like a base because it doesn't contain OH-, but this molecule here actually acts as a weak base because actually containing a strong base that contains OH- would also cause physical damage to the body. And again, this base, which is actually chemically identical to baking soda that you can find in your kitchen, basically exists to neutralize any of the HCl that makes it from the stomach into the small intestine, therefore preventing it from doing any damage to the inside structure of the small intestine, and therefore keeping the conditions of the small intestine relatively close to neutral so that only water is more or less available here. In part 2 of this video, we're going to look at a secondary role that the pancreas plays, specifically in the regulation of glucose. So this is not a digestive role, but actually examining the functions that the pancreas has in terms of regulating how much glucose ends up in your blood and how much of it can be absorbed into cells of your body.